Did you know that some of your favorite story elements, the ones that feel straight out of a fairy tale, might have actually walked the dusty paths of the Middle Ages? What if the dramatic, swoon-worthy scenes you love in medieval romance novels were more than just fiction? Around the 12th century, the lines between heroic legend and everyday life were blurrier than you might think. Number 9. Courtly love and the fine art of obsession. Picture this. A knight, brave and true, dedicates his entire being to a noblewoman who is usually already married, often to his own lord. His love is pure, unwavering, and frequently unrequited, or at least unconsummated. He performs heroic deeds, not for glory, but solely to win a fleeting smile or a favor from his beloved lady. This right here is the very essence of what we call courtly love, or in French, fin amour. It is one of the most defining characteristics of medieval romance literature, appearing in the soaring verses of the troubadours and the sprawling narratives of Chrétien de Troyes. Take Lancelot and Guinevere, for instance. Their tragic affair, central to the Arthurian cycle, is the poster child for courtly love's agonizing beauty and its devastating consequences. Lancelot's devotion to Queen Guinevere drives him to perform incredible feats of bravery, to endure humiliation, and ultimately to betray his king and friend, King Arthur. Their love is forbidden, tortured, and yet idealized as the highest form of devotion in the literature of the time. The literary ideal often presented courtly love as a refining force, something that made a knight more virtuous, more courageous, more skilled. It elevated the object of affection to an almost divine status, beyond earthly reach, making the pursuit itself more important than any physical culmination. The very difficulty of the love, its inherent impossibility, was part of its allure in these stories. Now, let's talk about the sort of real part. Did knights really pine away for unattainable ladies, writing poetry and risking life and limb for a mere glance? Well, yes, in a way. Concept of courtly love did not spring fully formed from the minds of medieval poets without any grounding in social reality. Courts of the High Middle Ages, particularly in regions like Aquitaine and Champagne, were vibrant centers of culture, poetry, and aristocratic refinement. Figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was a powerful duchess and queen, presided over courts where poets known as troubadours in the south of France and touffrins in the north were highly valued. These poets would sing and write about precisely this kind of idealized love. It is difficult to say how much of it was genuine romantic devotion and how much was a sophisticated game, a form of social etiquette, or a display of intellectual and artistic prowess. Some scholars argue that courtly love was primarily a literary construct, a set of conventions for poets to explore themes of desire, loyalty, and honor. It provided a framework for elaborate metaphors and intricate emotional narratives. However, it undoubtedly influenced the manners and expectations of the aristocracy. Young nobles would have been exposed to these ideals and may have tried to emulate them in their own interactions. Consider the courts of love, which some medieval texts describe as gatherings where real noble women would preside over disputes of love, debating the finer points of romantic etiquette, and even passing judgment on lovers' behavior. While the historical reality of these courts as formal legal institutions is debated and likely exaggerated, they reflect a pervasive cultural interest in the rules and rituals of love. The very fact that people would even discuss such theoretical judgments on love shows the depth of the fascination with these concepts. Moreover, the practice of a knight wearing a lady's favor, such as a scarf or a ribbon, into a tournament was a very real custom. This gesture symbolized his dedication to her and his intention to honor her through his martial skill. While not always tied to unrequited, idealized courtly love, it certainly played into the same narrative of a knight performing for his lady. The real-world motivations for these idealized relationships were often more complex than mere, unadulterated passion. In a society where aristocratic marriages were almost always arranged for political or economic gain, not for love, courtly love offered an emotional outlet. It allowed for the expression of intense personal feeling outside the rigid structures of the marital bond. It could also serve as a form of social climbing, as a knight who gained the favor of a powerful lady might advance his standing within the court. Furthermore, the act of serving a lady, even in an abstract way, was a demonstration of a knight's chivalric virtues, his courtesy, his loyalty, his bravery. It was a way to practice and display the refined manners that distinguished the nobility from the lower classes. So, while Lancelot's desperate yearning for Guinevere might seem like pure fantasy, the social dynamics and emotional undercurrents that gave rise to the idea of courtly love were very much a part of the real medieval world. It was a fascinating blend of literary artifice, social performance, and genuine human emotion, all wrapped up in the complex tapestry of aristocratic life in the Middle Ages. The impact of courtly love was profound, shaping not only the literature of the era, but also influencing the very notion of romantic love that continues to resonate in our stories today. It was a performance, a philosophy, and perhaps for some a deeply felt personal reality, illustrating that even the most ethereal of literary concepts can have roots in the lived experience of the past. Number 8. Knights in shining armor and the grind of being a warrior. The image is iconic. A knight, clad head to toe in gleaming metal, astride a magnificent warhorse, riding forth to right wrongs, protect the innocent, and win glory. He is noble, virtuous, and always ready for a challenge. This is the knight in shining armor trope, a cornerstone of medieval romance. From King Arthur's legendary Knights of the Round Table to the valiant heroes of epic poems, these figures represent the pinnacle of chivalric ideals. They are brave beyond measure, skilled in combat, unwavering in their loyalty, and often blessed with immense strength and moral fortitude. Their armor is typically described as sparkling, their weapons keen, and their steeds swift and powerful. They perform incredible feats, slaying dragons, defeating wicked sorcerers, and rescuing those in peril. These literary knights are almost superhuman in their dedication to justice and honor. Tales of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or the exploits of Roland and the Song of Roland, paint vivid pictures of warriors who embody these perfect virtues, ready to sacrifice all for their code and their cause. Their courage is boundless, their faith unshakable, and their commitment to their word absolute. The ideal knight was not just a fighter, but a paragon of Christian virtue and courtly grace, skilled in both the arts of war and the refinements of peace. Now, let's peel back the layers of that gleaming armor to see what was really underneath. While the ideal of the knight in shining armor was very much present in medieval literature and the aspirations of the nobility, the reality of medieval knighthood was far more gritty, complicated, and often brutal. First, the armor itself. While plate armor, which appeared later in the medieval period from the 14th century onwards, could indeed be polished to a high sheen for parades or special occasions, it was often kept practical and durable for actual warfare. It would get dented, scratched, and dulled by rust and grime. Knights did not typically ride around in mirror-polished suits of armor on a daily basis. They were professional warriors, and their gear was for protection and intimidation, not just for show. Early medieval armor was mail or scale, which offered protection but certainly did not shine in the way we often imagine. Practicality trumped aesthetics in the battlefield. Furthermore, the motivations of real knights were not always as pure as their literary counterparts. While the chivalric code, which emphasized honor, courage, loyalty, and courtesy, was a real and important ideal, it was also often breached. Knights were part of the feudal system, owing loyalty and military service to their lords in exchange for land and status. They were often involved in violent land disputes, sieges, and raids that had little to do with protecting the innocent or upholding justice. Many were driven by personal ambition, a desire for wealth, or the need to consolidate power. The reality of medieval warfare was harsh and often indiscriminate, with knights participating in massacres, plundering, and destruction. Take, for example, the brutal realities of the Crusades. While many knights undoubtedly joined out of genuine religious fervor, others were motivated by promises of land, plunder, or adventure. The sack of Jerusalem in 1099, where crusaders indiscriminately slaughtered thousands of inhabitants, highlights a very different aspect of knightly behavior than the idealized tales. However, it is important to acknowledge that the idea of chivalry was incredibly influential. Knights were expected to uphold certain standards of conduct. They were trained from a young age in horsemanship, swordplay, and warfare. They learned the intricacies of courtly etiquette and were often expected to be educated to some degree, even if just in heraldry and warfare strategy. Tournaments, which we will discuss more, were real events where knights honed their skills and displayed their prowess, often in front of an audience of ladies and lords. These events, while dangerous, were a critical part of knightly culture, allowing them to gain renown and honor. The concept of prowess, or martial skill combined with courage, was highly valued. Knights did indeed lead armies, defend castles, and play a crucial role in the political and military landscape of medieval Europe. Figures like William Marshal, a famous 12th century knight, embodied many of the chivalric ideals. He was known for his incredible martial skill, his loyalty, and his honorable conduct, rising from relative obscurity to become one of the most powerful men in England. His life story, documented in the history of William Marshal, shows a real knight navigating the complexities of medieval politics and warfare while striving to uphold a code of honor. So, while the shining armor might have been a bit of a literary embellishment, and the motives not always as pure as driven snow, the warrior class of knights was undeniably real, powerful, and deeply influential. They were the backbone of medieval armies, embodying a complex mix of brutal effectiveness, aristocratic refinement, and the often aspirational ideals of chivalry. Number 7. Damsels in distress and the reality of medieval women. In countless medieval romances, the narrative often revolves around a beautiful noblewoman who finds herself in dire peril. She is kidnapped by a wicked sorcerer, imprisoned in a high tower, or threatened by a monstrous beast. She is fragile, helpless, and utterly reliant on a brave knight to ride to her rescue. Her role is to be beautiful, virtuous, and a passive object of desire and protection. Think of Guinevere, frequently abducted or threatened, requiring Lancelot or Arthur to save her. Or the many princesses in fairy tales, adapted from medieval legends, who are cursed or trapped, waiting for their Prince Charming. This trope creates a dramatic tension, providing the hero with a clear objective and a compelling reason to display his heroism. The damsel's vulnerability highlights the knight's strength and virtue, making his eventual rescue all the more satisfying. She is often presented as the ultimate prize for the hero, a symbol of his triumph and reward. Her helplessness amplifies his glory, making the act of rescue a central plot point and a means for the knight to prove his worth. Now, let's explore the reality for women in the Middle Ages. Were they always passive, helpless figures waiting for a hero? The answer is a resounding, sort of. While noble women in the Middle Ages certainly faced significant constraints and vulnerabilities, portraying them as universally helpless damsels in distress is a vast oversimplification. Yes, medieval society was highly patriarchal, and women, especially noble women, were primarily valued for their ability to produce heirs and to form political alliances through marriage. Their legal rights were often limited, and their lives were largely dictated by their fathers, husbands, or brothers. During times of war, noble women were indeed vulnerable. Castles could be besieged, and women and children within them faced starvation, disease, and the threat of violence or capture if the castle fell. Abductions of noble women did occur, but these were usually political maneuvers or criminal acts, not fantastical kidnappings by dragons. A lord might abduct an heiress to force a marriage and gain her lands, or a rival faction might seize a noblewoman to use as a hostage. These were grim realities, not romanticized adventures. However, to portray medieval noblewomen as uniformly helpless would be incorrect. Many noblewomen held considerable power and influence within their own spheres. They were responsible for managing vast estates, overseeing household staff, and administering justice in their husbands' absence. When their husbands went off to war or on crusade, it was often the lady of the castle who was left in charge, responsible for its defense. There are numerous historical accounts of women organizing defenses, raising troops, and even leading resistance against attackers. Take the example of Matilda of Tuscany in the 11th century, a powerful countess who ruled a vast territory in Italy, commanded armies, and played a significant role in the investiture controversy, a major political and religious conflict. Or Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and influential women of the 12th century, who ruled her own vast duchy, went on crusade, and was queen consort of both France and England. These women were not passive figures waiting for rescue. They were active participants in the political and military landscape of their time. Even less famous noblewomen often exercised considerable agency. They formed alliances, engaged in diplomacy, and managed complex family networks. Their influence might have been subtle, exerted through patronage or negotiation, but it was often very real. Furthermore, noblewomen were often highly educated. They learned to read and write, manage accounts, and sometimes even had knowledge of medicine or herbalism. They were patrons of the arts, commissioning manuscripts, tapestries, and contributing to the cultural vibrancy of their courts. The very romances that featured damsels in distress were often read aloud in noblewomen's chambers, and were sometimes even commissioned or inspired by them. Women like Marie de France, one of the earliest known female French poets, wrote popular lays that explored complex themes of love, loyalty, and destiny, sometimes featuring strong female characters who took initiative rather than merely waiting to be saved. So while the damsel in distress trope served a clear purpose in romance literature by providing a convenient plot device and a way to highlight heroic masculinity, the real medieval noblewoman was often a formidable figure, navigating a challenging world with intelligence, resilience, and often significant power within her sphere. Her distress might have been real, but her helplessness was far from a universal truth. She was a manager, a strategist, a patron, and often a defender of her home and family, proving that medieval women were much more than just pretty faces to be saved. Number 6. Epic quests and the long, dangerous roads of history. At the heart of many medieval romances lies the epic quest. A hero sets out on a perilous journey, facing countless dangers, wicked foes, and supernatural challenges, all to achieve a noble goal. This goal might be to retrieve a magical baggot, rescue a kidnapped monarch, defeat a great evil, or find spiritual enlightenment. Think of the Knights of the Round Table embarking on the quest for the Holy Grail, a journey fraught with temptation, spiritual trials, and physical hardship. Their quest is not just about finding an object. It is a spiritual pilgrimage, a test of their faith and purity. Or consider the adventures of figures like Beowulf, who undertakes a long voyage to slay monstrous creatures, or the arduous journeys undertaken by legendary heroes across vast and dangerous landscapes. These quests are always bog, forcing the hero to grow, to face their deepest fears, and to ultimately achieve a greater understanding or purpose. The journey itself is as important as the destination, symbolizing the hero's struggle against overwhelming odds and his unwavering commitment to his chosen path. The narrative arc of the quest provides a powerful framework for exploring themes of courage, sacrifice, and destiny, capturing the imagination of audiences for centuries. Now, let's talk about the real quests of the Middle Ages. Were people really embarking on such long and dangerous journeys? Absolutely. But their motivations and the nature of their challenges often differed significantly from those in the romances. The medieval world, especially during the High Middle Ages, was full of people undertaking incredibly arduous and perilous journeys. These were not usually for magical artifacts or to defeat mythical beasts, but for very real, tangible reasons. Pilgrimages, one of the most common forms of long-distance travel. Devout Christians would embark on pilgrimages to holy sites, often walking hundreds or even thousands of miles. Popular destinations included Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela in Spain. These journeys were incredibly dangerous. Travelers faced bandits, harsh weather, disease, starvation, and treacherous terrain. Many died along the way. However, the spiritual rewards were immense. The hope of forgiveness for sins, healing from illness, or a deeper connection to their faith. Counts like that of Marjorie Kempe, a 15th century English mystic who undertook extensive pilgrimages, illustrate the intense piety and incredible physical endurance required for such journeys. Crusades. Perhaps the most famous quests of the Middle Ages were the Crusades to the Holy Land. Tens of thousands of knights, soldiers, and commoners embarked on these military and religious expeditions, traveling thousands of miles across hostile territory. Their goals were to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim rule and defend Christian lands. These quests were epic in scale, involving massive logistical challenges, fierce battles, and immense suffering. They were literal armed pilgrimages, driven by religious fervor, promises of spiritual reward, and sometimes a desire for land and glory. The journey itself was a brutal ordeal, with many perishing before even reaching their destination. Trade expeditions. Merchants undertook dangerous long-distance journeys to acquire exotic goods, establishing trade routes across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Figures like Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant who traveled to China in the late 13th century, spent decades on his quest for trade and exploration, encountering vastly different cultures and landscapes. These journeys were driven by economic necessity and the desire for wealth, but they were no less perilous than any fictional quest. They involved navigating unknown territories, dealing with various rulers, and facing the constant threat of bandits and natural disasters. Military campaigns and diplomatic missions. Kings, lords, and their envoys frequently traveled long distances for war or diplomacy. These journeys could be extensive, lasting for months, as armies marched across kingdoms or ambassadors traveled to foreign courts to forge alliances or negotiate peace treaties. The scale of medieval armies on the move was immense, a logistical feat in itself, often devastating the landscapes they passed through. So while medieval people weren't usually looking for a holy grail, in the literal sense of a magical cup, they were constantly engaged in their own versions of epic quests driven by faith, survival, politics, or economic gain. The dangers they faced were very real. Disease, starvation, attack by bandits or rival factions, and the sheer unforgiving nature of the undeveloped landscape. Travelers relied on rudimentary maps, word-of-mouth directions, and often sheer luck. They navigated vast forests, crossed raging rivers, and climbed mountains, often sleeping rough or seeking shelter in monasteries and inns. Idea of the journey as a gutting experience, where one faces challenges and emerges changed, was deeply embedded in medieval thought, whether through religious pilgrimage or the harsh realities of travel. The romances simply amplified these real-world experiences, adding supernatural elements and romanticized motivations to create captivating tales that mirrored the underlying human drive for adventure and purpose. The long road was a central part of medieval life, and for many, life itself was a quest. Number 5. Tournaments and jousting, where chivalry met reality. The image of a grand tournament is a staple of medieval romance. Knights, resplendent in their colorful heraldry, gallop towards each other on thundering war horses, lances poised, their shields bearing the marks of their noble houses. Cheering crowd, including ladies of the court, watches eagerly. The objective is to unhorse one's opponent, often for the honor of a particular lady, or to win a valuable prize. These events are portrayed as spectacles of skill, bravery, and pageantry, a refined form of combat where rules of chivalry are strictly observed. Heroes like Ivanhoe in Sir Walter Scott's novel, or the countless knights in Arthurian legends, demonstrate their prowess in the joust-winning accolades and the admiration of the crowd. The tournament is not just a fight, it is a social event, a fashion show, and a stage for puting martial excellence, all wrapped up in a dazzling display of medieval pomp. It is the perfect setting for a hero to prove himself, for rivalries to play out, and for romantic sparks to fly. Now let's get into the sort of real part. Were tournaments and jousting real? Absolutely. In fact, they were incredibly popular throughout the Middle Ages, evolving over centuries from chaotic, dangerous melees to more formalized jousting competitions. They served multiple purposes beyond mere entertainment. Military training, tournaments were essentially war games. They allowed knights to practice their combat skills, horsemanship, and battlefield maneuvers in a relatively controlled environment. While rules were in place, the fighting was still very real, and injuries and even deaths were common. Early tournaments known as tourneys or melees involved large groups of knights fighting mock battles over vast areas, sometimes encompassing entire villages. These were essentially training for cavalry charges and group combat, social display and runting. Tournaments were major social events, attracting nobility from far and wide. They were opportunities for lords to display their wealth and power, for ladies to be seen, and for knights to network, secure patronage, and find opportunities for service. Newcomers could make a name for themselves, and established warriors could reaffirm their status. It was a chance to see and be seen, to forge alliances, and to engage in courtly rituals. The elaborate tents, banners, and costumes added to the spectacle, making them significant cultural events. Honor and reputation. For knights, success in the tournament circuit was a crucial way to gain fama, fame, and honor. A successful knight could win valuable prizes, including horses, armor, and ransoms from defeated opponents. This could be a significant source of income and advancement for knights, who were not necessarily wealthy landowners. The concept of prowess, or martial skill combined with courage, was paramount, and tournaments were the ultimate stage to demonstrate it. Knights would travel from tournament to tournament, seeking to challenge the best and improve their standing. Entertainment, of course. Tournaments were also a spectacular form of entertainment for both the nobility and the common people who gathered to watch. The thunder of hooves, the clash of lances, and the excitement of skilled combat provided a thrilling spectacle, much like modern sporting events. Pageantry and rituals surrounding the events added to their appeal, making them grand occasions that drew crowds. Romantic element. While the primary focus might have been martial and social, the romantic element was indeed present. Knights would often dedicate their performance to a particular lady, wearing her favor, a scarf, ribbon, or sleeve, into the lists. A victory in a tournament could certainly enhance a knight's standing in the eyes of a lady, and perhaps even lead to romantic interest or courtly flirtation. The Queen of Love and Beauty, who sometimes presided over the tournament, crowning the victor, was a real role, adding to the romanticized atmosphere. However, the reality was often far from the perfectly chivalrous ideal. Tournaments were incredibly dangerous. Broken bones, concussions, and even death were common occurrences. Despite rules, the violence was real, and knights sometimes took advantage of the competitive environment to settle real-life grudges. There were numerous fatalities recorded throughout the centuries. Kings and popes often tried to ban or restrict tournaments due to their lethality and the perceived waste of resources, but their popularity among the nobility made such bans difficult to enforce. Jousting, with its focus on single combat with lances, became more formalized over time, with specific rules about where to strike and what armor to wear. Barriers were introduced between the jousters to prevent collisions, making it safer but still perilous. So, while medieval romances romanticized the tournament, making it a stage for pure chivalry and effortless heroism, the real-life versions were gritty, dangerous, and commercially driven events where knights risked life and limb to prove their worth, gain wealth, and uphold their honor. They were a crucial part of medieval culture, blending martial training, social display, and thrilling entertainment in a way that truly shaped the medieval world. Number 4. Magic and sorcery. Belief in a mystical world. In medieval romances, magic is everywhere. Powerful wizards like Merlin guide kings and heroes with their ancient wisdom and spells. Enchantresses like Morgan Le Fay wield dark arts, creating illusions, transforming people, and brewing potent potions. Heroes wield magical swords that glow with an inner light, or wear enchanted armor that deflects blows. Dragons breathe fire, mythical beasts roam the land, and prophecies shape the destinies of kingdoms. Magic is an active force, driving the plot, creating obstacles, or providing miraculous solutions. It adds an element of wonder and unpredictability, allowing for incredible feats and fantastical landscapes. The boundaries between the mundane and the magical are often blurred, making the world of the romance feel alive with unseen forces and ancient powers. Think of King Arthur drawing Excalibur from the stone, a symbol of divine right and magical power, or the various curses and blessings that shape the lives of characters, demonstrating the profound influence of the supernatural on their world. Now, let's dive into the sort of reality of magic and sorcery in the Middle Ages. Did people believe in wizards and dragons? Well, they certainly believed in a magical world, but it was usually quite different from the fantastical depictions in romances. The medieval worldview was deeply imbued with a sense of the supernatural. For most people, the world was filled with unseen forces, both benevolent and malevolent. Divine miracles and saints. The primary form of magic people believed in was divine intervention. Miracles, performed by God, saints, or holy relics, were considered real and regular occurrences. Pilgrimages to shrines were undertaken in hopes of miraculous cures. Relics of saints were believed to possess immense power, able to heal the sick, protect from harm, or even influence the outcome of battles. The line between natural occurrence and divine intervention was not always clear, and almost any unusual event could be attributed to a higher power. Folk magic and superstition. Alongside official church teachings, there was a widespread belief in folk magic, often practiced by local cunning folk wise women or village healers. This included charms for protection, spells for fertility or love, herbal remedies, often with a magical component, and curses to harm enemies. People used amulets, recited incantations, and performed rituals to influence outcomes, ward off evil, or bring good fortune. These practices were often a blend of practical knowledge, superstition, and ancient traditions passed down through generations. astrology and alchemy. Among the educated elite, pursuits like astrology, the belief that celestial bodies influence human events, and alchemy, the attempt to transmute base metals into gold or find an elixir of life, were common. While not magic in the sense of spells, they were attempts to understand and manipulate the hidden forces of the universe through esoteric knowledge. Many scholars, even respected ones, engaged in these practices, seeing them as legitimate scientific or philosophical endeavors. Demons and witchcraft. There was a strong belief in demons and the devil, who could influence human affairs and tempt individuals into sin. From the later Middle Ages, the concept of witchcraft, where individuals made pacts with the devil to gain supernatural powers, became increasingly prominent, leading to the persecution of suspected witches. While the dramatic witch hunts are more characteristic of the early modern period, the fear and belief in demonic magic existed throughout the Middle Ages. Monsters and strange creatures. Medieval people certainly believed in strange and wondrous creatures, often based on misinterpretations of travelers' tales, exotic animals or exaggerated folklore. Dragons, while not necessarily believed to literally fly around breathing fire in every forest, were symbolic of evil and chaos, often appearing in religious imagery and chronicles describing unusual events. Counts of sea serpents, griffins, and other fantastical beasts could be found in bestiaries and travel logs, blurring the lines between reality and imagination. So, while no one was expecting Merlin to pop out of a tree to cast a spell, the medieval world was steeped in a pervasive belief in supernatural forces. People lived in a world where divine miracles were real, where local wise women could offer charms for various ailments, and where the forces of good and evil were constantly at play in their daily lives. The magic in romances was an exaggeration and romanticization of these deeply held beliefs, transforming the subtle influences of folk magic or the awe-inspiring power of divine intervention into overt dramatic displays. It reflected a fundamental medieval understanding that the world was more than just its visible components, full of hidden powers and mystical connections. The wonder and mystery that magic brought to the stories resonated deeply with an audience that already believed in a world alive with unseen forces. Number 3. Feudal lords and ladies, the rulers of the land. Every medieval romance features them, the powerful lord who rules a vast domain, dispensing justice and leading his knights, and his noble lady, overseeing the household and embodying grace. These are the feudal lords and ladies, the very bedrock of medieval society. King Arthur and Queen Guinevere are the archetypal examples, ruling a kingdom, holding court, and setting the moral tone. Other romances might feature a benevolent duke, a wise countess, or a stern baron, each with their own castle, lands, and vassals. Their authority is absolute within their domain, their word law. They hold grand feasts, entertain guests, and are the center of power, wealth, and culture. Their presence defines the landscape of the story, shaping the lives of everyone beneath them, from the humblest peasant to the most valiant knight. They are the fixed points around which the entire society of the romance revolves, representing order, stability, and the established hierarchy. Their decisions drive major plot points, whether it is granting a quest, bestowing a title, or arranging a marriage. Now, let's explore the sort of reality of feudal lords and ladies. They were very real, but their lives and roles were often far more complex, brutal, and pragmatic than the idealized portrayals in romance literature. The feudal system. The feudal system was the dominant socio-political structure in much of medieval Europe. It was a hierarchical system based on land tenure and loyalty. King would grant land, a fief, to a powerful lord, a vassal, in exchange for military service, loyalty, and other obligations. These lords, in turn, would grant portions of their land to lesser lords or knights, creating a pyramid of allegiances and obligations. This system was the fundamental framework for medieval governance warfare and economic life. Lords held significant judicial power within their domains, often presiding over local courts and administering justice. The lord's role. A medieval lord was far more than just a figurehead. He was a military leader, responsible for raising and leading his knights in times of war. He was a land manager, overseeing agricultural production, collecting rents and taxes from his tenants. He was a judge, settling disputes and upholding the law, or his interpretation of it. He was a political actor, negotiating with other lords, forming alliances, and sometimes rebelling against his own sovereign. His life was often a cycle of warfare, administration, and maintaining his authority. Warfare was endemic, and lords spent significant time fighting, training, or preparing for conflict. The stereotype of the gentle, wise lord was often far from the truth. Many were harsh, ambitious, and ruthless in protecting their interests and expanding their power. The lady's role, while not always on the battlefield, the lady of the castle was also a crucial figure, far from the purely ornamental damsel trope. Her primary duties were to bear and raise heirs, ensuring the continuation of the family line, and to manage the vast household. This involved overseeing servants, managing supplies, organizing meals, and ensuring the smooth running of the castle's domestic economy. In her husband's absence, she often took over the administration of the estate, managing finances, overseeing tenants, and even directing the defense of the castle during sieges. Many noblewomen were astute administrators capable of managing complex financial and logistical operations. They were also key figures in dynastic politics, forging alliances through marriage, and often acting as negotiators or influential advisors to their husbands. Women like Blanche of Castile, regent of France for her son Louis IX, demonstrated extraordinary political skill and military acumen, defending the kingdom against rebels and invaders. Castles as centers of power. The castles that feature so prominently in romances were indeed the literal centers of power and life for medieval lords and ladies. They were not just residences, but fortified strongholds, administrative centers, and economic hubs. They represented the lord's authority and provided protection for his family, retainers, and the surrounding populace in times of danger. Life within a castle was often crowded, bustling, and far from glamorous. It was a place of work, defense, and governance. So, while the idealized feudal lord and lady of romance might seem too perfect or too dramatically tragic, the fundamental roles they played were very real. They were the ruling class, the landowners, the military commanders, and the administrators of medieval society. Their lives were dictated by power, duty, and survival in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. The romances simply filtered these realities through a lens of heroism and courtly ideal, presenting a more refined and often more virtuous version of medieval authority. The structure of power, the importance of land, and the central role of these aristocratic families in shaping the lives of millions were undeniably real, forming the very backbone of medieval Europe. Number 2. Disguises and secret identities, hidden truths and real motives. A favorite trope in medieval romances involves characters adopting disguises or hiding their true identities. A noble knight might enter a tournament unrecognized, seeking to prove his worth solely through his skill rather than his fame or lineage. A king might travel incognito through his lands to observe his subjects firsthand. Princess might flee her forced marriage in humble peasant clothes, seeking refuge and freedom. These hidden identities create suspense, allow for unexpected revelations, and often serve to test the true character of individuals. They enabled characters to escape danger, gather information, or experience life from a different perspective. Lancelot often rode out in plain armor, without his heraldry, to seek adventure as an unknown knight, proving his prowess without relying on his famous name. It adds a layer of intrigue, where true intentions and hidden virtues are revealed only when appearances are stripped away. The disguise often highlights the idea that true worth lies beneath the surface, not in titles or outward show. Now, let's turn to the sort of reality of disguises and secret identities in the Middle Ages. Did people really go around in elaborate costumes, or did they have more practical reasons for hiding who they were? The answer is that while the dramatic, romanticized disguises of literature were rare, the practice of concealing one's identity for various practical and sometimes vital reasons was absolutely real. Safety and travel. Traveling in the Middle Ages was dangerous. Roads were often infested with bandits, and rival lords or political enemies could pose a threat. A wealthy noble or merchant might travel with a smaller retinue and in plainer clothes to avoid drawing attention to themselves and becoming targets for robbery or kidnapping. This was a form of pragmatic self-preservation, not a romantic adventure. Anonymity could provide a measure of safety and freedom of movement. Espionage and reconnaissance. In a world of constant warfare and political intrigue, spies were very real. Agents might infiltrate enemy territories or courts, pretending to be merchants, pilgrims, or common laborers to gather intelligence. King might send trusted advisors on secret missions requiring them to operate without revealing their true allegiances or high status. This was a crucial part of medieval statecraft and military strategy. Criminal activity and evasion. Naturally, criminals, outlaws, and fugitives would often hide their identities to evade capture. Changing clothes, adopting new names, and moving to different regions were common tactics for those trying to escape justice or maintain a life outside the law. This was the dark side of anonymity, used for survival rather than noble pursuits. Pilgrims and mendicants. Pilgrims, by their very nature, were often travelers from afar, and their identities might not be fully known to those they encountered. Mendicant friars who traveled from place to place often lived simply and mingled with all strata of society, sometimes allowing them to gather information or influence events without revealing their full status or mission. Torment anonymity. The idea of a knight entering a tournament incognito was indeed a real practice. Sometimes a knight might do this to surprise his opponents, to test his skill without the pressure of his reputation, or to avoid identifying himself to potential rivals. He might wear plain armor, without his coat of arms, or heraldry, or use a fictional name. While not always a dramatic romantic gesture, it allowed for a purely skill-based competition and could add an element of intrigue to the proceedings, much like a masked ball. Winning a tournament as an unknown knight could enhance one's legend and prowess even more. Royal observation. While perhaps exaggerated in literature, there are historical accounts of rulers or high-ranking officials traveling less formally to gauge the public mood or observe local conditions firsthand. King Henry V of England, for example, is said to have disguised himself to wander among his troops before the Battle of Agincourt. Though such tales often contain elements of legend. Purpose was usually practical, to understand the common people better, to prevent corruption, or to assess the loyalty of local lords. So, while the knight disguised as a peasant who then wins the hand of the princess is largely a literary flourish, the fundamental idea of concealing one's identity was a practical and necessary tool in the medieval world. It was used for survival, for espionage, for strategic advantage, and sometimes for the sheer thrill of it, mirroring the deeper human desire to sometimes shed the burdens of one's known self and operate in the world on different terms. The romances took these real-world possibilities and elevated them into thrilling plot devices, adding a layer of mystery and excitement to the already dangerous lives of medieval characters. Number 1. Love potions and charms, the pursuit of affection. In many medieval romances, love is not just a matter of the heart. It can be influenced or even forced by magical means. Love potions are brewed, charms are whispered, and enchantments are cast to compel affection or to bind two people together. The most famous example is the story of Tristan and Isolde, where a love potion accidentally consumed binds them in an irresistible tragic passion that defies all social and moral boundaries. Other tales feature witches or sorceresses, creating charms to win a reluctant lover, or to break up an unwanted union. These magical interventions create intense drama, often leading to fate-driven love affairs that transcend reason and responsibility. They highlight the idea that love can be a powerful, almost uncontrollable force, sometimes external to the individual's will, shaped by supernatural intervention. Potion or charm removes the choice from the lovers, making them victims of an overwhelming, magical desire. Now let's turn to the sort of reality of love potions and charms in the Middle Ages. Did people really believe they could conjure love with a magical brew? Yes, they absolutely did. And they often tried, though the results were more psychological than magical. The belief in love potions and charms was widespread throughout medieval society, rooted in a mix of folk traditions, superstition, and a pervasive belief in the power of sympathetic magic. Folk remedies and superstition. For centuries, people have sought ways to influence love, fertility, and attraction. In the Middle Ages, this often took the form of using herbs, concoctions, and rituals believed to possess specific properties. Local cunning folk, wise women, or village healers were often consulted for such remedies. These concoctions might include specific plants, animal parts, bodily fluids, or other ingredients prepared under certain astrological conditions or with specific incantations. The intent was to create an emotional or physical bond, to attract a desired person, or even to cause impotence in a rival. Psychological power. While these potions and charms had no actual magical power, their effectiveness often lay in the power of suggestion and the placebo effect. If someone believed they had consumed a love potion, they might interpret subsequent feelings or interactions as evidence of its efficacy, leading to a self-fulfilling prophecy. The psychological impact of rituals and beliefs was significant, especially in a world where supernatural influences were widely accepted. Associated with illicit magic, the Church generally condemned such practices as witchcraft or superstition, viewing them as attempts to interfere with God's will or as pacts with demonic forces. Those who practiced or commissioned such charms risked accusations of heresy or sorcery, especially as the Middle Ages progressed and fears of witchcraft intensified. Despite the risks, people continued to seek out these remedies, driven by desperation, hope, or unrequited desire. Cultural concio. In a society where arranged marriages were common, and individuals often had little say in their partners, love potions offered a fantastical, albeit dangerous, path to romantic fulfillment. They provided a way to escape the rigid social structures and influence fate itself. The desperation for love or companionship could drive people to seek out any means, even those deemed illicit or dangerous by authorities. Historical records. While direct evidence of successful love potions is non-existent in the magical sense, historical records, including court documents from later periods, show that people were indeed accused of or confessed to using such charms. These were often part of broader accusations of witchcraft or illicit magical practice, reflecting a genuine belief that such things could be done and a genuine fear of their potential misuse. For example, chronicles and legal records occasionally mention cases where individuals claim to have used charms or potions to influence affections or harm rivals. These often involved local informal practices rather than grand, theatrical, magical rituals. So while no one was truly falling in love because of a magically binding liquid, the belief in love potions and charms was a very real and sometimes dangerous part of medieval life. The romances took this underlying belief and exaggerated it, turning human desperation and folk superstition into dramatic fate-altering magical events. Tragic love of Tristan and Isolde, brought on by an accidental potion, is a powerful literary device that resonated deeply with an audience that understood the very real human desire to influence the uncontrollable force of love and the often perilous means people might resort to in their pursuit of it. This blending of real-world belief with fantastical exaggeration created some of the most enduring and captivating love stories of the age.